It was supposed to be a normal day at the clinic. A simple checkup, nothing more. But then, he walked in. A millionaire husband, blinded by rage, and in front of patients, nurses, and cameras, he punched his pregnant wife so hard the room went silent. Blood on the floor, panic in the air, and the world watching. What he didn't know is that her father isn't just any man. He owns the hospital network, and he's about to erase that millionaire from every boardroom in the city. What follows is not just revenge, it's justice served cold. So stay with us, because this story will hit harder than you think. Tell us what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. The waiting room of Brookline Family Dental smelled faintly of mint and disinfectant. The overhead lights hummed softly, reflecting off the pale beige walls where posters of smiling patients promised painless whitening. Anna Whitmore sat quietly in the corner, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other clutching her purse. She was 8 months pregnant, her face pale but calm. It was supposed to be a routine cleaning, a simple check before her next prenatal visit. The world outside was cool and bright, but inside, the air felt too still, like the room was holding its breath. The door burst open with a violent clang. Ethan Whitmore strode in wearing a gray suit and the arrogance of a man who never heard the word no. His tie was loose, his jaw tense. Even before he spoke, the tension followed him like a shadow. The receptionist froze mid-sentence. The sound of the drill in the back room stopped. For a heartbeat, no one moved. "What the hell is this?" he barked, holding up his phone. "You canceled the whitening appointment without telling me?" His voice was loud enough to echo off the tiled floor. Anna rose slowly from her seat, startled but trying to stay composed. "Dr. Mitchell said it wasn't safe during pregnancy," she said softly. "The chemicals could affect the baby." "The baby?" Ethan scoffed. "You've been using that excuse for months. Do you even realize how ridiculous you sound? The gala is next week. My wife can't show up with yellow teeth." A few patients exchanged uneasy glances. One older woman clutched her handbag tighter. Anna's heart thudded against her ribs. She could feel the baby shift inside her, startled by the sound. She wanted to sit back down, but Ethan stepped closer, towering over her. "Ethan, please," she whispered. "Let's talk outside." "There's nothing to talk about," he hissed. "You're embarrassing me again, just like always." The nurse by the counter began to stand, sensing trouble. Before anyone could react, Ethan's hand shot forward. The crack of his palm against Anna's face shattered the silence like a gunshot. Her head snapped to the side. She lost her balance and fell hard against the corner of the table. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. A collective gasp erupted through the room. "Sir, stop!" the nurse shouted, running forward. Anna lay half-curled on the floor, dazed. Pain flared across her cheek and rippled down her spine. She reached instinctively for her belly. The baby kicked once, hard. The sound of a chair scraping echoed as someone bolted for the phone. Ethan stood motionless, his hand trembling, eyes cold but flickering with the sudden realization of what he had done. His voice came low and defensive. "She's overreacting. It wasn't that hard." Dr. Laura Mitchell appeared at the doorway in her white coat, her eyes widening at the sight. "Mr. Whitmore, step back now," she ordered. "You need to leave this area immediately." "I'm her husband," he snapped. "This is between us." "No," Dr. Mitchell said firmly. "This is assault. You need to step back before I call security." The receptionist was already dialing 911. The nurse knelt beside Anna, pressing a towel to her mouth where a small cut had opened. "Stay with me, Mrs. Whitmore," she murmured. "Don't move too fast. Tell me if you feel dizzy." "Well," Anna tried to speak, but only a broken whisper came out. "My baby! Please, check the baby!" Dr. Mitchell's expression softened. "We will, I promise. Just breathe slowly." The clinic had turned into chaos. One patient stood by the window recording everything on her phone. Another was crying quietly. Ethan rubbed his forehead, his voice shaking with anger rather than remorse. "This is absurd. You people don't understand. She's been impossible lately." "You not?" "Sir," the receptionist said, trembling. "The police are on their way." That was when Ethan realized the walls were closing in. He straightened his jacket, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're making a mistake," he said through clenched teeth. "All of you." Then he turned sharply and stormed out. The door slammed. leaving behind the faint jingle of the bell and the smell of his expensive cologne. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner and Anna's shallow breathing filled the room. Dr. Mitchell crouched down, placing her stethoscope against Anna's belly. "Heartbeat is fast, but steady," she said. "We'll monitor until paramedics arrive." Anna stared blankly at the ceiling tiles above her, tears spilling from the corner of her eyes. She could still feel the sting of his hand, the echo of that slap vibrating through her bones. But it wasn't just pain. It was disbelief. She had seen flashes of his temper before, but never this. Never in public. Never with the child's life at stake. When the paramedics arrived, their radios crackled and the scent of antiseptic grew stronger. Dr. Mitchell gave a quick report. 30-year-old female, 8 months pregnant, facial trauma, possible abdominal stress, vitals stable, but fetal heart rate elevated. The paramedics lifted Anna gently onto the stretcher. She tried to hold the nurse's hand, her fingers trembling. "Doctor," Anna whispered, her voice small and cracked. "Was anyone recording?" Dr. Mitchell glanced toward the waiting area. Several patients looked away, but one woman nodded, clutching her phone protectively. "Yes," Dr. Mitchell said. "We'll make sure it's preserved. You need to focus on yourself and your baby." Anna closed her eyes as the stretcher rolled toward the door. The bright sunlight from outside flooded the clinic, harsh and almost blinding. The crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk parted as the paramedics passed. Somewhere behind her, Dr. Mitchell's calm voice followed. "We'll contact your family. You're safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign. Anna's cheek still burned. Her hands pressed over her belly, feeling the faint rhythm of her daughter's heartbeat against her palm. As the ambulance doors closed, she whispered to herself, barely audible over the sirens beginning to wail. "You're okay, baby. You're okay." Lund. The city moved around them, unaware that a single act of violence inside a small dental office had already set something far greater in motion. The sound of that punch would not fade with the sirens. It would echo through boardrooms, courtrooms, and newsrooms before the story was over. The siren cut through the quiet morning traffic as the ambulance pulled into Whitmore Medical Center. The hospital's glass facade shimmered under the Boston sun, reflecting a place built on healing and control. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and coffee, a familiar combination that usually comforted Dr. Robert Whitmore. But today, as he received the call from the emergency department, something inside him snapped out of that composure. His daughter's name, spoken through the static of the radio, carried a tone he had only heard in the worst cases of trauma. He left a meeting, mid-sentence. The hallway lights flashed against his glasses as he hurried toward the trauma bay. Nurses parted to let him pass, recognizing both his authority and the rare tension etched on his face. When he pushed open the sliding glass doors, the world narrowed. On the stretcher lay Anna, her face swollen, a bruise blooming across her left cheek like a dark flower. Her eyes opened when she heard his voice. "Dad," she whispered, her lip trembling. The sound broke whatever control he had left. "Don't talk," he said softly, his hand gripping hers. "You're safe now." The attending physician gave a quick report. Facial trauma, possible mild concussion, blood pressure elevated but stabilizing. Fetal heart rate is strong. We're monitoring closely. The words were clinical, precise, but Robert barely heard them. His gaze stayed on the bruise, on the small cut near her temple where blood had dried. He had spent decades treating strangers, separating emotion from medicine. But this was his child. No medical training could mask the fury rising beneath his calm exterior. Margaret, his wife, appeared moments later, breathless from running down the corridor. When she saw Anna, her knees almost gave out. "Oh my God," she whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth. She moved beside the bed, stroking her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. "Who did this?" Anna's voice cracked. "Ethan." The name hung in the air like poison. Margaret's face drained of color. "He hit you?" she said in disbelief. "He hit you while you're pregnant?" Anna nodded slowly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "In front of everyone." Robert's eyes darkened. The muscles in his jaw tightened until the veins stood out against his neck. The monitor beside Anna beeped steadily, each sound marking the passing seconds of a father's transformation. For years, Robert had been known for his composure, for his ability to make decisions under pressure that saved lives and stabilized chaos. But this was different. This was not a patient. This was blood. Dr. Laura Mitchell entered quietly, still wearing her lab coat from the dental office. She carried a folder pressed against her chest. "Dr. Whitmore," she said respectfully, "I'm so sorry. I wanted to bring this directly to you." She placed the folder on the small counter beside the bed. "The incident was caught on our security cameras. I also made a copy of the patient reports and statements from witnesses." Robert opened the folder slowly. The first image on the monitor froze on Ethan's raised hand. The second showed his fist connecting with Anna's face. Robert's breath caught in his throat. The sound of the heart monitor filled the silence, steady and relentless. Margaret turned away, covering her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Anna reached for her father's sleeve. "Dad," she said, her voice shaking, "I just want the baby to be okay." Robert forced himself to breathe. "She's going to be fine," he said. "You're both going to be fine." But his eyes were cold, locked on the screen. The video looped again and again, until he finally pressed stop. "Send this to my office," he told Dr. Mitchell. "Every copy you have. I'll handle the rest." "Yes, sir," she said quietly. He stood by the window for a long time after she left, his reflection framed against the skyline of Boston. The city that had celebrated his achievements now looked different, distant, indifferent. Behind him, Margaret tried to comfort Anna, but her sobs came in broken waves. Robert clenched his fists at his sides. Every instinct as a physician told him to focus on healing. Every instinct as a father told him to destroy the man responsible. A knock came at the door. His assistant, Emily, entered holding a tablet. "Sir, the contracts department is requesting your approval for next quarter's renewals with MedSync Systems." Robert turned slowly, his voice calm but icy. "Suspend them. Effective immediately." Emily blinked. "All of them, sir?" "All of them," he repeated. "Send formal notices to every facility under our network. MedSync Systems is suspended from all business activities with Whitmore Medical Group pending review." Margaret looked up, startled. "Robert, what are you doing?" "What he did in that clinic," Robert said quietly, "was not just violence against her. It was a stain on this family's name, on everything we've built." Anna's eyes widened. "Dad, please don't." He cut her off gently, his tone steady. "I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing this because actions have consequences. If a man lays a hand on a woman carrying his child, he loses every privilege that came with that union, including the name he used to build his fortune." Margaret stepped closer. "He'll retaliate," Robert nodded. "Let him. He can try to fight in the marketplace. I'll fight in every hospital boardroom from here to New York. You." Outside the window, the city shimmered under the afternoon light. Ambulances came and went. Life in the hospital continued as usual, unaware that inside one office, a quiet declaration of war had just been made. Robert turned back to his daughter and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Rest. Don't think about anything else tonight. I'll take care of everything." Anna looked at him through swollen eyes. "Dad, what are you going to do?" His expression softened for a moment, the fury folding into something colder, more deliberate. "I'm going to make sure the world knows what kind of man Ethan Whitmore really is." Margaret took his hand, her voice trembling. "Robert, please be careful." He gave her a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Careful was yesterday. As he stepped into the hallway, the automatic doors slid shut behind him with a quiet hiss. The noise of the hospital returned. Machines, footsteps, voices. But inside Robert's mind, it was silent. He walked toward the elevator, already calling his legal advisor, his voice low and controlled. "Cancel every contract. Prepare statements for the press. I want documentation on MedSync's current partnerships." When the elevator doors closed, his reflection stared back at him, older now, but steady. The man who spent his life healing others was about to learn how to fight. The fury of a father had found its target, and the first blow would not be in anger but in calculation. The sound of the elevator descended through the building like a slow heartbeat. Downstairs, the city waited, unaware that by nightfall, the first cracks in Ethan Whitmore's empire would already begin to spread. The morning after the assault, the city of Boston woke to another ordinary workday, but inside the mirrored towers of the medical district, the name Whitmore carried new weight. Dr. Robert Whitmore's calls from the previous night had reached every boardroom, every hospital administrator, and every private medical investor in New England. By sunrise, a quiet storm was already moving through the network that held Ethan Whitmore's fortune together. At 7 a.m., the first call arrived at MedSync Systems headquarters, a contract termination from Whitmore Medical Group. The message was short and formal, citing ethical concerns regarding recent public conduct. 20 minutes later, another came from Greenfield Hospital, then 2 more from affiliated clinics. By 8, the list of cancellations stretched across Ethan's monitor like a slow-motion collapse. He sat behind his glass desk on the top floor, still wearing the same shirt from the night before. Coffee stains marked the sleeve where his hand had trembled. The bruise on his knuckle had turned a deep purple. Around him, the walls of his office reflected his own image back at him, fractured through the glass. His assistant entered quietly, holding a folder of printed emails. "You might want to see this," she said. Ethan flipped through the pages. Each letter looked the same, cold and precise. Contracts dissolved, partnerships suspended, access to hospital systems revoked. He leaned back in his chair, his voice rough. "How many?" 11 hospitals, sir, including Whitmore Medical, St. Joseph, and Emerson Regional. That's about 60% of our client base." Ethan laughed once, short and bitter. 60%, he repeated. "Do you know what that means?" His assistant hesitated. "It means you'll need to address the investors before they hear it from someone else." Ethan stood abruptly. "No, it means my father-in-law thinks he can erase me from his world. But I built this company without his charity. I can rebuild it without his blessing." He walked to the window, staring down at the traffic far below. His reflection looked pale, drawn, almost unfamiliar. The phone on his desk buzzed again. Another cancellation. He ignored it. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the office, barking orders as he passed. "Get the legal team in here. Schedule a press call for noon." "I'm not going down quietly." While Ethan's rage filled the upper floors of MedSync Systems, the lower floors buzzed with quiet panic. Employees whispered in the hallways. Some were already updating their resumes. The company's reputation had been its greatest asset, and overnight, that trust was gone. Across town, Robert sat in his hospital office surrounded by reports. His assistant Emily read out loud the list of terminated contracts. So far, 9 facilities have confirmed cancellation. 3 more are pending review, Robert nodded. "Keep the statements consistent. Emphasize patient safety and professional ethics. No personal comments." Emily hesitated. "Dr. Whitmore, the press will connect this to your family. Are we prepared for that?" Robert looked up, his expression controlled. "Let them. The truth doesn't need explanation. It only needs consistency." He turned toward the window, watching the morning traffic pass through the busy hospital roundabout. For years, he had believed that justice in medicine came through quiet reform, through policy and education. But today, justice was louder. Today, it had a pulse that matched his daughter's pain. In the ward below, Anna rested in a private room. She had refused painkillers, wanting to stay alert for every update. Margaret sat beside her, reading messages from friends and colleagues who had seen the video spreading online. The world outside was starting to whisper about Ethan's violence, but Anna barely heard them. All she wanted was to feel her baby's heartbeat steady again. When Dr. Mitchell visited to check on her, Anna asked the same question she had asked every hour. "Is my father really doing all this because of me?" Dr. Mitchell gave a small nod. "He's doing it because no father should ever have to see what he saw on that video." Anna looked down at her hands, the IV line taped to her wrist. "He'll destroy Ethan's company." Dr. Mitchell's tone was calm. "Then maybe Ethan should have thought before he hit you." By late afternoon, Ethan's board of directors gathered in the conference room. The air was tense, thick with expensive cologne and unease. The lead investor, Thomas Gray, cleared his throat. "Ethan, this situation is untenable. The video, the hospital cancellations, the Whitmore connections, it's killing our credibility." Ethan's voice was clipped. "This company is not built on my marriage. It's built on innovation." "Maybe," Thomas said, "but innovation doesn't mean anything without trust. Right now, every doctor in this region sees your name and thinks liability." Ethan slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed through the room. "So that's it? You all think I'm done?" No one answered. The silence said enough. When the meeting ended, Ethan stood alone in the empty room. The skyline beyond the window looked gray now, stripped of its morning shine. On the table lay the last printed contract with Whitmore Medical Center. He stared at the logo for a long moment before tearing it cleanly in half. Across the city, Robert met with his financial director. "MedSync's revenue depends on our referrals," the director explained. "Once we close those channels, the entire system collapses within a week." "Then close them," Robert said simply. That night, the news began to spread through Boston's business circles. Reports of mass cancellations, whispers of ethics violations, speculation about a brewing war between two powerful families. The story hadn't reached the public yet, but insiders already knew something monumental was shifting. In his office, Robert poured himself a glass of water. His reflection in the window looked older than he remembered. For the first time in decades, he felt the line blur between justice and revenge. He closed his eyes and saw Anna's bruised face again, the small tremor of her hand as she tried to speak. That image silenced every doubt. There was no line anymore. At MedSync headquarters, the building lights flickered as the cleaning crew moved through empty halls. Ethan remained at his desk, staring at the dark monitor. Every file on his computer felt like a ghost of what used to be his empire. He picked up a photograph from the corner of the desk, his wedding day. Anna smiling in a white dress, his arm around her waist. He stared for a long time, then turned the photo face down. The phone rang one last time that night, another investor pulling out. He didn't answer. He already knew what they would say. The world that once admired him was gone, replaced by silence and judgment. Outside, rain began to fall against the glass. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, indistinct and cold. Somewhere across town, his father-in-law sat beneath the same rain, steady, deliberate, and unrelenting. The battle had begun, and both men knew it. As midnight approached, Ethan leaned back in his chair, the sound of distant thunder rolling through the skyline. He whispered into the dark, "You think you've won, old man, but this isn't over." He didn't know that by the next sunrise, his private downfall would no longer be private at all. The storm was about to reach the public eye. By dawn, Boston was buzzing. What began as a quiet whisper in the medical district had turned into a roar online. The video from Brookline Family Dental had found its way to social media overnight. At first, it appeared on a small community page under the caption, "Patient records millionaire assaulting pregnant woman at clinic." Within an hour, it had been reposted hundreds of times. By noon, it was everywhere. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Ethan Whitmore's face filled the screen, his expression contorted with anger. The sound of the slap echoed, followed by the image of Anna collapsing to the floor. The recording caught the nurse shouting for help and the chaos that followed. There was no editing, no background music, only the raw brutality of what had happened. Across the city, people watched the clip on their phones, in cafes, on buses, in offices. Some gasped, others turned away. The comments flooded in by the thousands. "Monster. She's 8 months pregnant. How could anyone do this?" The story had no mystery to unravel. The evidence was undeniable. By midday, news anchors on every major network were repeating the same words. Millionaire tech executive Ethan Whitmore, founder of MedSync Systems, is facing public outrage after a video surfaced showing him striking his pregnant wife inside a dental clinic yesterday morning. The segment showed the blurred clip, followed by a still image of Anna being lifted onto a stretcher. The anchor's voice lowered when she said, "Sources confirm the victim is in stable condition and under the care of her father, Dr. Robert Whitmore, at Whitmore Medical Center." Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by the flicker of screens, replaying the same image from different angles. Every network carried it, every channel repeated his name. His PR manager stood by the desk, holding a statement. "We can still control this narrative," she said nervously. "If we release a message today, people might—" Ethan cut her off. "Might what? Forget that video? It's everywhere. It's on TikTok, on CNN, on Facebook. You can't spin that." She tried again. "We can shift focus. Say that you were under emotional stress, that the argument got out of hand." He turned sharply toward her, eyes flashing. "You think anyone will believe that? That I just lost my temper?" The public doesn't care about explanations. They want someone to hate, and they picked me. The PR manager hesitated. Then you have to show remorse. Cry on camera if you have to. People forgive tears. Ethan looked away, jaw tight. I don't cry. Outside, a crowd had started forming on the street below his office. Protesters held signs with phrases like "Justice for Anna" and "Stop violence behind closed doors." Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras flashing. The security guards struggled to hold them back. MedSync's once spotless reputation was bleeding faster than any company statement could repair. At Whitmore Medical Center, Anna was unaware of the chaos for most of the morning. The nurses had kept her phone off. Margaret sat beside her bed, reading quietly, trying to protect her from the storm outside. But when Dr. Mitchell came to check her vitals, her expression gave something away. Anna noticed. It's everywhere, isn't it? Dr. Mitchell hesitated, then nodded. The video was leaked last night. It's already gone viral. The networks are calling it the Whitmore incident. Anna looked down at her hands, fingers tracing the edge of the hospital blanket. The Whitmore incident, she repeated, almost whispering. They've turned it into a headline. Her mother leaned forward, taking her hand. Don't read any of it, sweetheart. The world will say what it wants to say. You just focus on resting. Anna's voice was quiet but firm. No, Mom, the world should see. For once, they should really see what kind of man he is. That afternoon, the hospital's phone lines rang nonstop. Journalists demanded statements. Patients stopped in the hallways to whisper. The name Whitmore, once a symbol of trust in healthcare, was now mixed with scandal and fury. Robert watched it unfold from his office, his expression unreadable. He had not spoken to the media, and he did not plan to. He knew silence could be louder than any statement. Let the evidence speak for itself. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant Emily entered, holding a stack of newspapers. Every major outlet picked it up, she said. The Post, the Globe, even the Times. They're calling it the first public case of domestic violence in the tech med sector. Robert took one of the papers. The front page showed Ethan's photo beside Anna's hospital stretcher. The headline read, "Violence Behind Success. The Whitmore Scandal." He placed the paper down slowly, his voice low. Good. Let them talk. Meanwhile, Ethan's legal advisor arrived at his office carrying a file of damage assessments. We're in freefall, he said. 4 more hospitals cut ties today. 2 investors just froze their accounts. You need to issue a formal apology. Ethan glared at him. An apology is weakness. Ma. It's survival, the lawyer countered. Right now you're toxic. You can't buy silence. You can't bury a video like that. Ethan paced behind his desk, fists clenched. You think my father-in-law is behind this leak? The lawyer hesitated. It doesn't matter who leaked it. What matters is that the court of public opinion has already passed judgment. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. He looked out the window at the growing crowd below. Signs waved in the rain. The city lights reflected off the puddles, distorting the faces of people chanting his name with disgust. Something inside him twisted. Not remorse, but rage at losing control. Across the city, inside her hospital room, Anna scrolled through her phone for the first time since the assault. Each clip replayed the moment she was struck. The sound made her flinch, but she forced herself to watch. Her lips trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. They finally see, she murmured. He can't hide behind his company anymore. Dr. Mitchell entered quietly and adjusted her fore. You're strong, Anna, she said. Stronger than he ever was. Anna looked up, tears forming but not falling. I'm not strong yet, but I will be. As night fell, news helicopters hovered over both Whitmore Medical Center and the MedSync Tower. The city's skyline glittered with artificial light. For the first time, Ethan's empire and Robert's institution were being spoken of in the same sentence, not as partners, but as enemies on opposite sides of morality. Inside the hospital, Robert stood by the window of his office, watching the glow of camera flashes in the distance. He knew the next step would come soon. The outrage had done its work. The world had turned its eyes toward them. Now it was time to move beyond public anger and into action. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer. Prepare everything, he said quietly. Tomorrow we begin the legal process. The city outside roared with noise and judgment. Inside, Robert's calm voice carried a different kind of storm. The public fury had opened the door. What came next would decide how far justice could go. The following morning, Boston's skyline was gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed down on everything beneath it. Inside Whitmore Medical Center, the walls buzzed with the sound of phones and reporters outside demanding statements. But in a corner office on the top floor, the air was silent. Dr. Robert Whitmore sat behind his desk with his hands clasped, staring at a folder marked Legal Strategy, MedSync Systems. Across from him sat Sarah Chen, a well-known medical lawyer with a reputation for precision and control. She adjusted her glasses and opened the folder. I reviewed the footage, the witness statements, and the hospital's reports. We have a solid case, she said, but we have to be methodical. He's still protected by corporate layers and financial power. If we want this to hold, we'll need to attack on both fronts, personal and professional. Robert nodded slowly. I don't care about his company's survival. I care that my daughter and her unborn child are never in danger again. Sarah studied him for a moment. Then we'll proceed with a two-part filing. Criminal charges for assault and battery against Anna Whitmore, civil suits for emotional and prenatal trauma, and a secondary motion to suspend MedSync's federal certifications due to ethical violations. Robert's eyes hardened. Do it. She closed the folder. It will be filed by this afternoon. Late. Downstairs in the recovery wing, Anna sat propped against her pillows. The bruising had turned from red to deep violet, spreading under her eye. Her hand rested on her stomach as she listened to her mother read a passage from a book, though her thoughts were elsewhere. When Sarah entered, Anna immediately straightened. Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah greeted gently. I'm here to walk you through what's going to happen. Anna nodded, her voice quiet. You're filing charge? Yes, Sarah said. And I'll be representing you directly. You don't have to testify right away. We'll start with written affidavits and medical documentation. Once the case is opened, the court will summon Ethan formally. Anna hesitated. He'll fight back. Sarah's tone was calm, almost reassuring. Let him. Men like him always think they can buy silence. But the moment he struck you, he gave up that power. Margaret reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. You're not alone in this. Not anymore. Out. At that moment, in a glass tower across the city, Ethan sat with his own legal team. The air in the boardroom was thick with frustration. His attorney, a man in a navy suit with a polished voice, placed a document on the table. You've been served, he said. Anna's filing both criminal and civil cases. Her father is coordinating through Whitmore Group. You're officially under investigation. Ethan leaned back, trying to mask the panic rising behind his eyes. This is an overreaction, he said sharply. She's emotional. Her father's using this to ruin me. The lawyer didn't flinch. Public perception doesn't care about context. There's a video. You hit her. She's pregnant. The entire country saw it. Every juror will walk into that courtroom with an opinion. Ethan slammed his palm on the table. Then counterfile. Hit them back. Defamation. Interference with business. Anything. His lawyer hesitated. That's risky. I said do it, Ethan snapped. If they want war, I'll give them one. By afternoon, both lawsuits were filed. The headlines hit the internet like lightning. Whitmore family sues MedSync founder over assault. Ethan Whitmore countersues for corporate sabotage. The public divided instantly. On social media, supporters of Anna posted messages of solidarity. Advocacy groups for domestic violence survivors shared her story. Meanwhile, a smaller but vocal crowd defended Ethan, claiming media bias. The city of Boston had become a battlefield of opinions, each fueled by anger and disbelief. At Whitmore Medical Center, Sarah joined Robert in the conference room with stacks of documents. Our first hearing will be next week, she said. We'll request a temporary restraining order. He won't be able to approach Anna or the hospital. Robert looked at the papers, his jaw set. Good. He doesn't belong anywhere near this building. Outside the hospital, the crowd of protesters continued to grow. Some held signs reading "Justice for Anna." Others displayed messages about patient safety. Cameras followed every move Robert made, though he refused to speak publicly. His silence made him appear colder, stronger, a man who let the law do his talking. Inside her hospital room, Anna watched the coverage on television. The anchors discussed her name with the same rhythm they used for political scandals. Doctor, Whitmore's daughter is seeking justice after being assaulted by her husband. one anchor said. Her case could set new precedent for domestic violence in high-profile medical corporations. Anna muted the sound. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen. Her face didn't look like her own anymore. "They talk about me like I'm a story," she said quietly. "But I'm still living it." Her mother brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Stories can change things, sweetheart. Sometimes the world needs to see the truth before it can act." That night, Sarah sat alone in her office, reviewing documents under the dim glow of a desk lamp. She had handled hundreds of cases, but few felt as personal as this one. The footage replayed in her mind. The sound of that slap, the moment the room froze. She opened a blank page in her notes and wrote, "Strategy. Hold ground. Protect the family. Push ethics inquiry." Across town, Ethan stood in front of a mirror in his penthouse. His reflection looked older, harsher. Reporters had gathered outside his building, shouting questions through the rain. He ignored them. In his hand, he held a copy of his countersuit. The words defamation and interference glared up at him. He whispered to himself, "They think they can destroy me. They have no idea who they're fighting." But deep inside, the cracks were spreading. Calls from investors stopped. Invitations to medical conferences were rescinded. Even his closest allies were beginning to distance themselves. The power he had once wielded so easily was slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Robert returned home late, exhausted. Margaret met him at the door with a quiet question. "Did you do the right thing?" He paused before answering. "There's no right thing in a situation like this. Only what must be done." She nodded slowly. "Then do it all the way." Robert poured a glass of water and stared out the window. The city lights flickered against the wet pavement. He thought of his daughter asleep in her hospital bed, her hand resting on her stomach. Somewhere in that stillness, he found his answer. He turned back to Margaret and said softly, "Tomorrow, we go to court." Outside, thunder rolled again, echoing across the skyline. It wasn't just a storm anymore. It was the sound of a legal war that had finally begun. The air inside the hospital room was heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The constant beeping of machines filled the silence, slow and steady at first, then uneven. The rain outside tapped gently against the window, a rhythm that matched Anna Whitmore's heartbeat. Her eyes were half open, staring at the ceiling while her mind drifted somewhere far away. The pain in her head had dulled, but the ache in her chest was relentless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same moment, his hand rising, the sound of impact, the floor rushing toward her. The nurses moved quietly, adjusting monitors, whispering to each other. One of them glanced at the screen, showing the baby's heartbeat. The rhythm spiked, then steadied again. "Blood pressure's still high," she said softly. "We'll keep her on observation." Dr. Mitchell entered the room, her white coat slightly damp from the rain outside. She offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How are we feeling today?" Anna turned her head slowly. "I don't know. Everything feels heavy." "That's normal," Dr. Mitchell replied gently. "Your body's still recovering from the trauma. But your baby's heart is strong. She's holding on." The words were meant to comfort, yet they made Anna's throat tighten. "I'm the one who should be holding on to her," she whispered. Outside the room, Robert stood with his arms crossed, watching through the glass. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. He had been awake for 36 hours straight, overseeing both his daughter's care and the hospital's legal team. When Dr. Mitchell stepped out, he turned to her immediately. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "How bad is it?" "She's stable," Dr. Mitchell said, "but her stress levels are dangerously high. The baby's responding to every spike in her blood pressure. If this continues, we may have to consider early delivery." Robert's shoulders stiffened. "Too early," he murmured. "She's only 34 weeks." Dr. Mitchell nodded. "That's why we're monitoring closely. She needs calm, rest, and no more emotional shocks." Robert looked back through the glass. His daughter's hand rested protectively over her stomach. "Calm," he repeated softly. "That's not something we can promise her right now." "Oh." Inside the room, Margaret sat by the bed, knitting quietly. The rhythmic click of the needles filled the space with a strange kind of peace. Anna watched her mother's hands move. "You still remember how to do that?" she asked faintly. Margaret smiled. "Your grandmother taught me when I was about your age. It helps me think, helps me breathe." Anna looked toward the window where rain streaked down in thin, silver lines. "Everything feels like it's falling apart, Mom. The world outside hates him, but I still can't stop hearing his voice. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it." Margaret set the knitting aside and took her daughter's hand. "You survived him. That's what matters now. You and your baby are safe here. The rest will sort itself out." Anna tried to believe it. She wanted to. But safety felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at any second. The court date was days away, and reporters still waited outside the hospital gates. Even the nurses whispered when they passed her door. The entire country seemed to be watching her, but none of them could understand what it meant to live with that fear. That night, the rain turned to thunder. Lightning flashed against the window, illuminating the room in brief bursts of white. Anna woke suddenly, her heart pounding. The monitor beside her bed began to beep faster. She pressed the call button, her voice weak. "Nurse, please. Something's wrong." "Nah." Within seconds, the door burst open. Dr. Mitchell and 2 nurses rushed in. "It's okay, Anna," the doctor said firmly. "Just breathe for me, slow and steady." Anna clutched her belly. "It hurts. She's moving too much." Dr. Mitchell checked the monitor. "Heart rate's elevated. We need to stabilize her pressure." The nurses adjusted the IV, their movements quick but controlled. One of them spoke softly to Anna, counting her breaths. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rolling across the city like an angry drum. Robert and Margaret arrived moments later, both pale with fear. "What happened?" Robert demanded. Dr. Mitchell's voice remained calm. "A stress response. She's having contractions. We're trying to slow them down." Anna gasped for air, gripping her father's hand. "Don't let them take her yet, please," she cried. Robert squeezed her hand, forcing his voice to stay steady. "No one's taking her, sweetheart. You're both going to be fine." For hours, the storm raged outside while the doctors worked to stabilize her condition. At last, near midnight, the monitors began to slow. The baby's heart rate evened out. "Doctor," Mitchell exhaled quietly. "We're clear," she said. "She just needs rest." When the team left, only the family remained. Margaret wiped the sweat from Anna's forehead and whispered, "You scared us half to death." Anna gave a faint, tired smile. "I scared myself too. Robert stood near the window, staring out at the city below. The storm clouds were starting to break, faint light glinting off wet rooftops. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe. But beneath that relief lay a quiet rage. He had watched his daughter nearly lose her child because of one man's cruelty. No lawsuit could undo that. No verdict could erase the fear he had seen in her eyes. When Anna finally drifted to sleep, Margaret covered her with a warm blanket. Robert turned to his wife. "Tomorrow, she needs peace," he said softly. "No calls. No cameras." Margaret nodded. "I'll make sure of it." But as Robert left the room, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah Chen. "Ethan's lawyers filed a new motion. He's requesting temporary visitation rights." Robert stared at the words, his grip tightening on the phone. The sound of the storm outside seemed to rise again, though the rain had stopped. He walked down the corridor slowly, each step measured and deliberate. In the ICU, the machines continued their steady rhythm. Anna slept, her hand still resting protectively on her stomach. The faint heartbeat of her unborn child echoed through the monitor, soft but persistent. Outside, the clouds began to part, revealing a sliver of pale morning light. The storm had passed for now, but in the quiet that followed, a new one was already gathering. The night smelled of rain and antiseptic. Inside the delivery wing of Whitmore Medical Center, the lights were low, and the air pulsed with quiet urgency. Nurses moved quickly between stations, voices low but firm. At the far end of the corridor, a single room glowed under soft white light. Inside, Anna Whitmore was in labor. It was 3 weeks too soon. Dr. Mitchell stood at the bedside, her voice calm but steady. "You're doing great, Anna. Just keep breathing, slow and steady." "You have—" Anna gripped the rails of the hospital bed. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her hair clung to her skin. "It's too early," she gasped. "She's not ready." Dr. Mitchell met her eyes. "Sometimes babies decide for themselves. You just have to help her find her way." Robert and Margaret waited outside the room, both pale with worry. They could hear muffled voices, the rhythmic beeping of machines, and Anna's occasional cries. Robert stood motionless, hands clasped tightly behind his back. Every instinct told him to go in, to do something, but all he could do was wait. When the door opened, a nurse stepped out. "Dr. Whitmore," she said, breathless. "The baby's heart rate is dropping. We might need to move her to emergency delivery." Robert's throat tightened. "Do what you have to do," he said. His voice came out low but firm. Inside, Anna's world had narrowed to pain and sound. The monitors beeped faster. Every muscle in her body burned. She could feel her strength fading, but she refused to let go. "Stay with me," she whispered to her belly. "Just stay with me a little longer." Dr. Mitchell's voice cut through the noise. "We're almost there. One more push." The storm that had hovered over the city for days had finally broken. Rain hammered against the hospital windows, wind howling through the vents. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. Anna pushed with the last of her strength, her body trembling. Then, silence. For a few unbearable seconds, no one moved. The monitors slowed. The room froze. Anna felt the world tilt around her. "Why isn't she crying?" she whispered. Then came a sound so small and fragile it seemed to stop time. A single cry, soft at first, then stronger. The nurse's voice trembled with relief. "She's breathing! The baby's breathing!" Anna's eyes filled with tears. She reached out weakly as the nurse lifted the tiny newborn into her arm. The baby's skin was pink and warm, her cry sharp and real. Anna held her close, whispering through tears. "You made it. You're here." Outside, Robert heard the sound of the baby's cry and exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Margaret collapsed into his arms, sobbing quietly. "She's alive," she said. "Oh, thank God she's alive." Minutes later, the nurse opened the door. "Would you like to meet your granddaughter?" Robert stepped inside, every step slow, almost reverent. The harsh lighting softened as he reached the bedside. Anna looked up, pale but smiling faintly. "Dad," she said, her voice hoarse. "This is Hope." He looked down at the tiny face, wrapped in a soft white blanket. The baby's eyes were closed, her little fingers curled tightly. For a moment, Robert could not speak. Then he touched her hand gently, his voice breaking. "Hope," he repeated. "That's the right name." Margaret joined him, tears shining in her eyes. "She looks just like you when you were born," she whispered to Anna. Anna smiled weakly. "Then maybe she'll be as strong as you." The nurse adjusted the monitors and smiled. "Both mother and baby are stable now. We'll move them to recovery soon." For a brief moment, peace filled the room. The sound of rain softened, and the chaos of the outside world seemed distant. But peace, as Robert knew too well, was fragile. Downstairs, outside the hospital entrance, flashing lights and shouting voices broke the calm. Reporters had gathered despite the storm. Cameras were pointed at the doors, waiting for a glimpse of anyone from the Whitmore family. Among them stood Ethan Whitmore, holding a bouquet of white lilies. His coat was soaked from the rain, but he didn't seem to notice. The cameras turned toward him as soon as he appeared. "Mr. Whitmore," a reporter shouted, "is it true your wife gave birth tonight?" Ethan forced a smile. "Yes," he said, his voice rehearsed. "I just want to see my wife and my child. I made mistakes, but a father has the right to be there." The crowd buzzed with questions. "Do you regret what happened? Will you face the charges? Are you seeking custody?" Ethan ignored them and started walking toward the hospital doors. Security guards blocked his path. "Sir, you're not allowed inside," one said. "The Whitmore family requested privacy." "I'm her husband," Ethan snapped. "You can't keep me out." Before the guards could respond, the hospital doors opened again. Robert stepped outside, his figure framed by the light from the lobby. The crowd fell silent. Ethan froze when he saw him. Robert's voice carried over the noise of the rain. "If you take one more step, I'll have you removed." Ethan clenched his jaw. "I came to see my daughter." Robert's expression didn't change. "You lost that right the moment you hit her. You will not walk into this hospital. Not tonight. Not ever." Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Reporters shouted questions, but Robert didn't flinch. His calm, measured voice cut through the chaos. "This hospital is a place of healing, not a stage for redemption." He turned and walked back inside. The security guards closed the doors behind him. Outside, Ethan stood motionless in the rain, his bouquet hanging limply in his hand. The cameras caught every detail, the wet hair sticking to his forehead, the hollow look in his eyes. Inside, Robert returned to the room. Anna looked up at him, her baby sleeping peacefully against her chest. "Was he here?" she asked. "He tried," Robert said quietly. "But he's gone now." She nodded, her eyes heavy. "Good." Robert pulled a chair closer to her bed. For a long time, he just watched the small bundle in her arms. The steady sound of the baby's breathing filled the room. Outside, the storm began to fade. The lights of the city reflected off the wet streets, turning everything silver and still. Anna closed her eyes and whispered, "She's safe now." Robert reached out and gently touched the baby's head. "Yes," he said softly, "she's safe." But deep down, he knew the battle wasn't over. The world outside those walls was already preparing its next headline, its next attack. The storm had calmed for the night, but morning would bring a new fight, one that would reach beyond hospitals and homes, into courts and cameras. He looked once more at his granddaughter and whispered, "Rest while you can, little one. Tomorrow, the world will know your name." The rain had stopped, but the city still looked drenched in the aftermath of the storm. Inside the quiet corridors of Whitmore Medical Center, the air smelled of coffee and new beginnings. Hope Whitmore slept peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that outside those walls, her father's empire was starting to crumble. The storm that had brought her into the world had only just begun for Ethan. That morning, Sarah Chen arrived at the hospital with a folder pressed against her chest. Her expression was calm but focused. She walked straight to Robert's office, where he was reviewing a stack of legal documents. "We've received something," she said, placing the folder on the desk. "An anonymous source just sent this to my firm. You'll want to see it." Robert opened the folder. Inside were dozens of printed emails and data logs. His brow furrowed as he scanned the first few lines. "What am I looking at?" "Internal MedSync correspondence," Sarah explained. "They show Ethan authorized access to confidential hospital records, patient files, billing systems, even private research data. He's been selling medical information to third-party corporations for years." Robert looked up slowly. "That's a federal crime." "HIPAA violations," Sarah confirmed. "If these are authentic, he could face criminal prosecution." The sender said more evidence is coming. Robert leaned back, exhaling heavily. "Who sent it?" "No name. Just a message. Justice should be public." Across the city, in a cramped apartment that smelled of stale coffee and printer ink, a former MedSync analyst named Rachel Morris pressed send on another encrypted email. Her hands trembled. She had been part of Ethan's data team for 3 years. She had seen the quiet manipulation of patient data, the money flowing to offshore accounts, the hidden contracts signed in back rooms. When she saw the video of him hitting his pregnant wife, something inside her broke. She could no longer stay silent. By noon, Sarah's legal team had verified the files. They were real. She drafted an official letter to the Department of Health and Human Services and attached every piece of evidence. Her message was clear. MedSync systems knowingly violated federal patient privacy laws for profit. Meanwhile, news of the data leak reached the media before the government could act. One by one, headlines appeared across the country. Scandal deepens. MedSync founder accused of data exploitation. Ethan Whitmore faces new allegations amid assault case. The story spread like wildfire. The footage of the assault was still fresh in people's minds, but now there was something even darker, proof that the man behind the medical empire had built his success on betrayal and greed. Television anchors called it the largest ethical breach in modern healthcare. Every newscast showed the same 2 images, Ethan's fist raised inside the clinic and a spreadsheet of stolen patient data. In the hospital's recovery wing, Anna watched the broadcast on the small television mounted on the wall. Hope slept beside her, wrapped in a soft pink blanket. Margaret sat at the edge of the bed, her face pale but proud. "It's all coming out now," she said quietly. "People are finally seeing who he really is." Anna's voice was soft. "It doesn't make the pain disappear, but maybe it makes it mean something." Dr. Mitchell entered, carrying a clipboard. "You'll be cleared for discharge in 2 days," she said. "The baby's doing well, you both are." Anna smiled faintly. "Thank you for everything, Doctor." Dr. Mitchell hesitated before speaking. "You're stronger than you think, Anna. What you've done, standing up to him, it's giving a lot of women courage. Outside, camera crews lined the hospital entrance. Reporters shouted questions at anyone who entered or left. But Robert remained silent. His focus was on the next step. In his office, he and Sarah prepared for the federal hearing that would follow. "Once the Department of Health confirms the authenticity," Sarah said, "the FBI will get involved. It's no longer just a civil case." Robert nodded. "Then we let the system work. We don't need to destroy him. His own actions will do that." Lo! Across town, in his darkened penthouse, Ethan sat alone, surrounded by empty bottles and glowing screens. His phone vibrated constantly, missed calls, lawyer alerts, news updates. The words blurred together until they meant nothing. His lawyer's voice came through on speakerphone. "Ethan, this is serious. They have data logs. You need to cooperate before they make an example out of you." Ethan's voice was hoarse. "They won't touch me. I built this city's medical backbone. They need me." They don't," the lawyer said flatly. "Not anymore." For a moment, silence filled the room. Ethan stared at the reflection of himself in the glass wall, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. The city lights below looked distant, like a world that no longer belonged to him. He grabbed a bottle and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, leaving streaks of red wine dripping down the white paint. Later that night, Rachel Morris's anonymous submission reached a local investigative journalist, Thomas Gray. Within hours, he aired a full report titled The MedSync Files. The broadcast exposed how Ethan had manipulated hospital partnerships to collect private data from millions of patients, selling access to insurance companies and pharmaceutical firms. The report cited federal laws, interviewed whistleblowers, and ended with a statement from Sarah Chen herself. "This case is no longer about one family, it's about the integrity of healthcare." The public's response was explosive. Social media filled with anger. Patients demanded answers. Hospitals across the state terminated their contracts with MedSync. Stocks plummeted overnight. At Whitmore Medical Center, Robert watched the broadcast in silence. Margaret stood behind him, hand resting on his shoulder. "You did what needed to be done," she said softly. Robert shook his head. "No, the truth did it. All we did was let it breathe." In her room, Anna turned off the TV and looked down at her sleeping daughter. The soft rise and fall of the baby's chest reminded her why she had survived. She whispered, "You'll never know the world he built. You'll build your own." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. It was not a storm, but something quieter, the sound of change. Across Boston, offices were emptying, contracts dissolving, reputations falling. In a small newsroom downtown, Thomas Gray ended his broadcast with a final line that echoed across the airwaves. Once hailed as a visionary, Ethan Whitmore now stands accused of betraying both his family and the very patients he claimed to serve. His empire is collapsing, and the people he hurt are finally being heard. At that same moment, in his penthouse, Ethan turned off the television. The screen went black, leaving his reflection staring back at him. The man in the glass looked older, broken, and unrecognizable. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Back at the hospital, the hallways were quiet. The storm had moved outside the building now, into the streets, into courtrooms, into headlines. Anna lay awake in the dim light, listening to her daughter breathe. In the silence, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: peace, fragile but real. The truth was no longer buried. It was alive, moving through the world like sunlight through broken clouds, unstoppable now. And as dawn approached, the first light touched the hospital windows, turning the glass gold. For the first time in a long time, the world seemed ready to begin again. The courthouse in downtown Boston stood tall under a gray winter sky. Its marble steps glistened from the morning rain, and the air buzzed with tension. Reporters filled the plaza outside, microphones raised, cameras aimed at the heavy wooden doors. Headlines had already called it the case that shook MedSync. Inside, the corridors echoed with footsteps and whispered anticipation. The smell of paper, ink, and disinfectant hung in the air. At the center of it all sat Ethan Whitmore, in a dark suit that no longer fit his pride. His hair was unkempt, his face pale from sleepless nights. The confident executive who once commanded boardrooms now sat behind a defense table, his hands clenched, his eyes hollow. Across the aisle, Anna Whitmore sat with her lawyer, Sarah Chen. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair tied back neatly. Her expression was calm, though her fingers trembled slightly in her lap. Beside her sat Robert and Margaret, their presence quiet but steady. In the gallery behind them, members of the public and the press filled every seat. The hum of whispered voices felt like the prelude to a storm. When the bailiff called for silence, the courtroom settled. The judge entered, his black robe flowing behind him, his expression stern but measured. This court is now in session for the case of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Ethan Whitmore, he announced. The words echoed like a verdict of their own. The prosecution began with precision. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Carla Hayes, spoke clearly and without theatrics. "This case is about power and consequence," she said. "The defendant used his wealth to harm those closest to him and to exploit the trust of millions of patients across this country. Today, we will show not only the violence he inflicted upon his wife, but the deception that infected his entire company." "No." She turned toward the screen where a large monitor stood ready. "The evidence will speak for itself." The first video played. The room fell silent as the footage from Brookline Family Dental appeared on the screen. Ethan's hand rose, the sound of the slap cracked through the speakers, and Anna's body fell to the floor. The video was brief, but its weight lingered in the air. No one breathed until the lights came back on. Carla's voice broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not an accident. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a man who believed he was untouchable." Ethan stared at the table, his jaw tight, refusing to look up. His attorney shifted uncomfortably beside him. The next witness was Dr. Laura Mitchell. She described the day of the assault in precise detail, her voice steady. "When I entered the room, Mrs. Whitmore was on the floor. She was bleeding. He was standing over her, saying she was overreacting. That is something I will never forget." When cross-examined, the defense tried to paint the incident as a moment of emotional stress. Dr. Mitchell didn't flinch. "There is no amount of stress that justifies striking a pregnant woman," she said. The room murmured in quiet agreement. Later, Sarah Chen presented the digital evidence from MedSync's internal files. Charts appeared on the projector, showing unauthorized data transfers and offshore transactions. These records prove that Ethan Whitmore used his access to private medical information for profit, Sarah said. He violated federal law, betrayed patient trust, and manipulated partnerships to build an empire on stolen ethics. The courtroom buzzed as each new piece of evidence appeared. Journalists typed furiously, their screens lighting the rows behind the gallery. Ethan finally looked up, his voice low but bitter. "You think I'm the only one who's done this?" he muttered. The judge warned him to remain silent. By afternoon, the defense called its witnesses, former employees who spoke of his brilliance, investors who praised his vision. But every word seemed hollow against the backdrop of the video, still replaying in everyone's mind. The jurors' faces were grim, their expressions hardening as the day went on. During the recess, Anna sat quietly in the hallway, her hands folded around a photo of her newborn daughter. The sound of footsteps and murmured conversations surrounded her. Sarah sat beside her. "You don't have to testify," she reminded softly. "The evidence is strong enough." Anna shook her head. "I need to. Not for him, but for her. For my daughter to know that I didn't stay silent." When the trial resumed, the courtroom grew still. Anna took the stand. The oath felt heavy on her tongue. Her voice trembled at first but grew steadier with each word. "I loved him once," she said. "I believed he was kind, that he would protect me. But love doesn't excuse violence. No amount of money or power makes it acceptable to hurt another person." She paused, glancing briefly toward Ethan, who refused to meet her eyes. "That day in the clinic, I wasn't just afraid for myself. I was afraid for my child, and I promised her that if we survived, I would never let anyone silence us again." The room was silent when she stepped down. Even the judge seemed momentarily still. Closing arguments came the next day. Sarah's voice was clear and resolute. "The law exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Today, the evidence has shown that the defendant broke that trust, in his home, in his marriage, and in his profession. It is time for accountability." When the jury left to deliberate, the courtroom emptied slowly. Hours passed. Rain began to fall again, streaking down the tall courthouse windows. Inside the waiting area, Robert paced silently while Margaret held Anna's hand. At last, the bailiff's voice called out, "The jury has reached a verdict." Everyone stood as the jurors filed back into the room. The foreperson handed the paper to the judge, who read it carefully before speaking. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant, Ethan Whitmore, guilty. On the charge of unlawful access and sale of medical data, guilty. On the charge of violation of ethical practice under federal law, guilty. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Reporters typed frantically. Ethan sat motionless, his face pale, lips pressed tight. The judge continued. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 3 years of suspended incarceration, full forfeiture of MedSync systems, and permanent revocation of all professional licenses related to medical technology. This court orders restitution to the victims of his corporate misconduct. Robert closed his eyes briefly, relief mixing with sadness. Margaret squeezed his arm. Anna didn't cry. She only looked forward, breathing slowly, her heart finally calm. As the bailiff led Ethan away, he turned once, looking toward Anna. Their eyes met for the briefest second, then broke apart. She felt no hatred, only the quiet certainty that justice had spoken. Outside the courthouse, rain turned to sunlight. Reporters shouted questions, flashes erupted, but Anna walked past them in silence. Robert followed beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. When they reached the bottom of the steps, Anna looked up at the sky. "It's over," she said softly. Robert nodded. "No, it's beginning." Together, they walked toward the waiting car. The courthouse behind them, fading into the noise of the city. Somewhere above, the clouds were breaking apart, and the first light of peace was finding its way through. 1 year later, the city of Boston looked different. The air felt lighter, as if the long shadow that had once covered it had finally lifted. The name Whitmore was no longer whispered in courtrooms or debated on news panels. It now stood for something new: hope, resilience, and the quiet strength of those who survived. At the edge of the city, the old Brookline family dental building had been renovated. The sign out front gleamed under the morning sun. Certified Safe Clinic. Hope Foundation for Family Safety. The same place where violence had once erupted was now a sanctuary. The waiting area was painted in soft shades of blue and white. The faint scent of lavender replaced the old, sharp smell of disinfectant. Photos of smiling families lined the walls. It looked nothing like the place that had started it all. Inside, Anna Whitmore moved carefully through the hallway, holding a clipboard filled with volunteer schedules. Her daughter toddled beside her, clutching a small stuffed bear. Hope was walking now, her laughter echoing softly against the freshly painted walls. Every sound reminded Anna how far they had come. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," said a young nurse as she passed. The new batch of volunteers just arrived from the university. Anna smiled. "Perfect. Let's get them settled in the conference room." The foundation had grown quickly. What began as a small initiative funded by her father's hospital had turned into a citywide program. Doctors, nurses, and social workers gathered to learn how to identify the warning signs of domestic abuse in patients. Every month, more clinics joined the network. Every month, more lives were saved quietly, before the headlines could ever exist. Robert arrived a few minutes later, holding a stack of documents. His hair had turned grayer, but his stride was still firm. When he saw his daughter and granddaughter waiting by the reception desk, he smiled. A genuine smile that had taken him months to find again. "You're early," he said. Anna looked up from her clipboard. "I like seeing it before everyone else arrives. It's peaceful." Robert handed her a folder. "These are the final approvals for statewide expansion. The governor signed them this morning." Anna took the papers, her eyes brightening. "That's incredible. I never thought it would happen this fast." "You earned it," Robert said. "You turned something terrible into something that can heal others. That's not luck. That's purpose." Hope reached for her grandfather, her small hands grabbing the edge of his coat. He lifted her easily, smiling as she tugged playfully at his tie. "You're getting heavy, little one," he said softly. "Too many apples?" "She's growing fast," Anna said. "She eats everything now." Robert laughed quietly. "Good. She'll need her strength." They walked together through the hallway. On the walls, plaques displayed the Foundation's mission statement: to protect families through awareness, compassion, and action. Beneath it hung a photo of Anna holding Hope on the day the clinic reopened. In the photo, the light from the window framed them both, like sunlight after a long storm. Margaret soon joined them, carrying a tray of coffee and muffins. "The staff meeting's ready," she said, "and the press is waiting for your closing remarks." Anna raised an eyebrow. "Press? Again?" Robert smiled faintly. "They love a redemption story." She sighed, half amused, half nervous. "As long as they don't turn it into a spectacle." "They won't," he assured her. "They're here to listen." The conference room was filled with doctors, volunteers, and journalists. The cameras were small this time, discreet. No one was looking for scandal anymore. They were there to document hope. Anna stepped to the podium, the same podium used at every medical summit her father once hosted. For a moment, she felt her pulse quicken, but when she looked out at the faces in front of her, people who wanted to make a difference, the fear faded. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "1 year ago, I walked into a hospital terrified, broken, and unsure if my child would live. I thought my life was ending. But today, standing here, I realize it was only beginning. What happened to me will never leave me, but it doesn't define me. What defines us is what we do after pain, what we build from it." She paused, her gaze softening as she looked down at Hope, who was sitting on Margaret's lap in the front row. "This foundation exists so that no one else has to suffer in silence. We believe in early recognition, in protection, and in education. We believe in changing how the world sees victims, not as weak, but as survivors." Applause filled the room. The sound was gentle, respectful. Robert's eyes glistened as he clapped. For him, this was more than justice. It was peace. After the conference, Anna stood alone by the window, watching the afternoon sun wash over the courtyard. Hope played on the floor, stacking colorful blocks. The city skyline shimmered in the distance, no longer a place of fear but of renewal. Sarah Chen arrived quietly, carrying a manila envelope. "The final closure papers for the case," she said. "He won't appeal. He's accepted the ruling." Anna nodded. "It's over then." "Yes," Sarah said. "Completely." They shared a brief silence, both understanding what those words meant. Then Sarah smiled faintly. "You did it, Anna. You turned pain into something powerful." After she left, Robert entered the room again. He handed Anna a small bouquet of pale blue flowers. "For your office," he said. Anna recognized them instantly. Forget-me-nots, the same kind her mother once planted in their garden. "They're beautiful," she said. "Do you remember the stairs at the old house?" Robert asked. "The 5th step, where you used to sit when you were little." Anna smiled softly. "You used to tell me stories there. You said every scar has its story." He nodded. "It's time to go back and add one more. That evening, as the sun set over the quiet city, Anna returned to the old Whitmore mansion. The house had been empty for months, preserved but untouched. She walked through the grand hallway, her footsteps echoing softly. The air smelled of dust and memory. When she reached the staircase, she paused. The 5th step was just as she remembered. She placed the bouquet there carefully. "For every woman who survived," she whispered. "For every voice that refused to stay silent." The fading light caught the flowers, making them glow a faint shade of blue. She stood for a long time, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. As she turned to leave, Hope's laughter echoed from the front door where Robert and Margaret waited. The sound filled the old house like music. Anna smiled, her heart full. In the distance, the church bells of Boston rang softly, marking the close of another day. Their sound blended with her daughter's laughter, rising together in the evening air. It was the sound of life, the sound of peace, the sound of justice.
The mahogany-paneled courtroom felt like a tomb. Vincent McGarvey, immaculate in a bespoke charcoal suit, radiated an aura of impatient power. His wife, Karen, was 47 minutes late. On the day she was scheduled to sign away their marriage, her half of his fortune, and her future, she had simply vanished. Vincent's lawyer whispered placations, but Vincent just stared at the empty chair beside her counsel. He wasn't worried. He was insulted. This was a pathetic, last-ditch attempt at drama. But as the heavy courtroom clock ticked past the hour, a different feeling began to curdle in the air. Not drama, but dread. The air in courtroom 4B of the Cook County Courthouse was thick with the institutional scent of old paper and stale coffee. It was a cold Tuesday in October, and the grey Chicago sky pressed against the tall, arched windows, promising a miserable afternoon. For Vincent McGarvey, the weather was the only thing that matched his mood. He checked his Patek Philippe for the 10th time. 10:52 a.m. The proceedings were scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. "Any word, Sarah?" Judge Eleanor Vance asked, her voice cutting through the tense silence. She was a woman in her late 60s with a formidable reputation, her sharp eyes missing nothing from behind her reading glasses. She did not suffer fools, and she despised delays. Sarah Jenkins, Karen Howard's lawyer, stood, her face pale. "No, Your Honor. I've called her cell multiple times. It goes straight to voicemail. I've texted. I've even called her sister in Michigan. No one has heard from her since last night." Vincent scoffed, a quiet, derisive sound that nonetheless filled the room. His own attorney, a sleek corporate shark named Marcus Thorne, shot him a warning glance. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice smooth as silk. "My client is, of course, concerned. However, it is not unlike Ms. Howard to be theatrical. Perhaps she's having second thoughts, and has chosen this unfortunate method to express them." The insinuation was clear. Karen was unstable, emotional, unreliable. It was the narrative Vincent had been carefully crafting for the past year, ever since Karen had shocked him by filing for divorce. Judge Vance's gaze shifted to Vincent. She saw a man accustomed to getting his way. Vincent McGarvey was a real estate titan, a man who didn't just own buildings, but seemed to own the very skyline. His power was a palpable force. "Mr. McGarvey," she said, her tone devoid of warmth, "your wife is 7 months pregnant with your child. Her theatrics, as your counsel puts it, seem ill-timed. Is there any reason you can think of why she would miss a hearing she herself requested?" "None that would make any logical sense, Your Honor," Vincent replied, his voice a carefully modulated baritone of feigned concern. "Karen has been under a great deal of stress. I have worried about her mental state. I just want this process to be over so we can co-parent amicably." Sarah Jenkins gripped the edge of her lectern, her knuckles white. Amicably. The word was a vile poison. For the last 6 months, she had listened to Karen detail Vincent's brand of amicability, the subtle threats, the financial strangulation, the isolation from her friends and family. He'd frozen their joint accounts, leaving Karen to live off a court-ordered pittance in a small Lincoln Park apartment while he remained in their sprawling Gold Coast penthouse. He wasn't ending a marriage. He was winning a war, Your Honor. "This is completely out of character for Karen," Sarah insisted, her voice trembling slightly. She was determined to see this through today. She wanted this finalized before the baby comes. She told me last night she had everything ready. She was relieved. Judge Vance studied Sarah, then Vincent. The power imbalance in the room was a chasm. On one side, a billionaire with a high-powered legal team. On the other, a missing pregnant woman represented by a competent but clearly rattled public interest lawyer. "We will adjourn until 2 p.m., the judge declared, her gavel striking the block with a sharp crack. "Ms. Jenkins, if you have not made contact with your client by then, I expect you to have filed a missing person report. Mr. McGarvey, you and your counsel will remain available." She fixed Vincent with a stare that brooked no argument. "Do you understand?" "Perfectly, Your Honor," Vincent said, a mask of civility hiding a flicker of triumph. A delay was annoying, but Karen's stunt only proved his point. She was a mess. The judge would see it, and he would get the favorable settlement he wanted. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah Jenkins hurried out, dialing Karen's number again. Voicemail. She called the building manager for Karen's apartment on West Armitage. He agreed to let her in for a wellness check. The 20-minute cab ride was agony. Every scenario that played in her head was worse than the last. When she arrived, the building manager, a portly man named George, met her with a concerned look. "Haven't seen her today. Usually see her walking in the morning." He unlocked the door to apartment 3A. Sarah's heart pounded as she pushed it open. "Karen?" she called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. The apartment was immaculate. Too immaculate. The bed was made, the dishes were clean and dry in the rack, the throw pillows on the sofa were perfectly arranged. It looked less like a home and more like a hotel room that had been tidied for the next guest. Then she saw it. On the small kitchen table was a cup of herbal tea, cold and untouched. Next to it lay Karen's prenatal vitamins, the bottle open, a single pill sitting beside it, as if she'd been interrupted mid-motion. A wave of cold dread washed over Sarah. She moved deeper into the apartment, her eyes scanning for anything out of place. She entered the bedroom. The closet door was slightly ajar. Inside, a small overnight bag sat on the floor, half-packed with baby clothes and a going-home outfit for Karen. It was the bag for the hospital. Why was it half-packed and abandoned? Then her gaze fell to the floor, near the bedside table. A single, small object glinted in the dim light. She bent down and picked it up. It was an earring, a simple pearl stud. She recognized it instantly. It was part of a set Karen's grandmother had given her. Karen cherished them. She was wearing them yesterday when they'd met to go over the final papers. The clasp was bent, broken, as if it had been ripped from her earlobe. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a woman who had simply decided to skip a court date. This was the scene of a disappearance. The silence in the apartment was no longer peaceful. It was screaming. Karen Howard was gone. And as Sarah stood there, clutching the broken pearl earring, she had a terrifying certainty that the man who wanted to erase her from his life had finally succeeded. She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking, and dialed 911. Detective Miles Miller hated domestic cases. They were messy, emotional, and the truth was always buried under layers of he said, she said. When he walked into Karen Howard's pristine apartment, his first impression was that Sarah Jenkins was overreacting. But then he saw the broken earring and the untouched vitamins, and his cop senses began to tingle. These were the small, discordant notes in an otherwise perfect symphony of domestic order. These were the things that pointed to trouble. His interview with Vincent McGarvey took place in the library of the Gold Coast penthouse, a room that smelled of old leather and new money. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of Lake Michigan, grey and churning under the October sky. Vincent sat in a wingback chair, a glass of what looked like expensive scotch in his hand, the very picture of urbane concern. "I just can't fathom it, Detective," Vincent said, swirling the amber liquid. "For her to just run off. It's irresponsible. The baby—" He let the sentence hang, shaking his head with practiced sorrow. "Mr. McGarvey, her lawyer doesn't think she ran off," Miller said, keeping his voice neutral. He sat opposite Vincent, his own cheap suit feeling shabby in the opulent room. Her wallet, her keys, and her phone were all found in the apartment. "People don't run off without the basics," Vincent sighed, a long, weary exhalation. "You don't know Karen. When she gets an idea in her head, She's like a runaway train. She probably has a secret credit card, a stash of cash somewhere. She's likely halfway to her sisters in Ann Arbor, trying to build leverage for a better settlement. It's a game, Detective. A cruel, manipulative game. He leaned forward, his eyes earnest. Look, I know how this looks. The angry husband, the contentious divorce. But I loved my wife. I still do. I was devastated when she left me. I admit, the divorce has been difficult. I've been trying to protect my assets, yes. Not from Karen, but for our son. To ensure his future is secure, no matter what happens. It was a masterful performance. Every word was designed to paint Karen as flighty and vindictive, and himself as the stable, long-suffering victim. But Miller had interviewed hundreds of liars, and Vincent McGarvey had all the tells, the overly detailed explanations, the emotional language that didn't quite match the coldness in his eyes. To understand the conflict, Miller needed to understand the before. "Tell me about the marriage," he prompted. "When did things start to go wrong?" Vincent's face tightened for a fraction of a second before relaxing back into his mask of sorrow. "It was the pregnancy," he said. "It should have been the happiest time of our lives. But it changed her." The half-finished nursery was painted a soft, gender-neutral yellow. Karen, her belly a gentle curve under her linen dress, was directing movers as they assembled a beautiful white crib. She was humming, a happy, contented sound. Vincent walked in, his expression unreadable. "What is all this?" he asked, his voice flat. "It's the crib I told you about, from that little boutique in Evanston. It's solid maple, non-toxic paint. Isn't it perfect?" She beamed, her face alight with joy. "I told you I would handle the nursery," he said, his voice dropping to a low, cold tone. "My designer has already sourced a custom suite from Italy. It's being shipped next month." Karen's smile faltered. "But I love this one. It's from a local craftsman, and my mother helped me pick it out." Vincent walked over to the crib and ran a hand over the smooth wood. "It's quaint, but it's not up to our standard, Karen. Our son will have the best, not something from a local craftsman. Call them and have them take it back." "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I won't. This is our baby's room, not a showroom for your clients. I want him to have this crib." Vincent turned to face her, and the coldness in his eyes was terrifying. He stepped closer, invading her space until she instinctively took a step back. "You seem to be confused," he whispered, his voice a silken threat. "You think this pregnancy gives you some new power, some new vote in this household. It doesn't. You live in my house, you spend my money, and you will raise our child according to my standards. This discussion is over." He walked out, leaving her standing alone in the yellow room. The joy had evaporated, replaced by a familiar, icy fear. It wasn't about the crib. It was about control. Absolute, unquestioning control. It was in that moment, with the scent of fresh paint in the air, that she knew her marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a prison, and for the sake of her unborn child, she had to escape. She became paranoid. Vincent continued his story to Miller, pulling the detective from the imagined scene. Accusatory. She started making wild claims about my business, my finances. She thought I was hiding money from her. It was delusional. "So you have no idea where she could be?" Miller pressed, circling back. "If I had to guess, her sister, Brenda, in Ann Arbor. They're thick as thieves. Karen would go there to hide out and lick her wounds. It was a solid lead, one Miller had to follow. But as he left the penthouse and stepped back into the gritty reality of the city, he couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent McGarvey wasn't just providing a theory. He was planting one. Later that afternoon, Miller got 2 phone calls that changed the entire trajectory of the case. The first was from Detective Thompson in the Ann Arbor PD. Brenda, Karen's sister, was frantic. She hadn't heard from Karen in 2 days and was about to drive to Chicago herself. Karen was definitely not with her. The second call was from dispatch. A city sanitation worker had reported an abandoned vehicle parked near an old, defunct steel mill by the Calumet River, a desolate, forgotten corner of the city. The license plate was a match for Karen Howard's grey Honda CR-V. Miller's blood ran cold. This was no longer just a missing person case. This was the spot where you dump a car you don't want found. This was where happy endings went to die. As he drove towards the location, sirens wailing, he knew the narrative had irrevocably shifted. The manipulative wife theory was crumbling, and in its place, a far darker story was beginning to take shape. A week crawled by. Karen Howard's disappearance became a media storm. Her smiling face, taken from a charity gala photo with Vincent, was plastered across every news channel and website. The narrative Vincent had so carefully planted had taken root. Troubled, pregnant wife flees ahead of contentious divorce. Pundits and armchair psychologists dissected her fragile mental state, while Vincent played the part of the heartbroken husband, pleading for her safe return in a televised press conference. In her chambers, Judge Eleanor Vance watched the spectacle with growing disgust. She had presided over thousands of divorce cases, had seen the ugliest face of human relationships. She knew that behind the closed doors of mansions, the cruelty could be just as savage as in any back-alley brawl, only quieter and more insidious. Vincent McGarvey's performance felt hollow, rehearsed, and Sarah Jenkins's raw, genuine fear for her client had stuck with her. On the 9th day of Karen's disappearance, a package arrived at the courthouse addressed directly to Judge Vance. It was a standard 9x12 manila envelope, unremarkable except for the lack of a return address and the slight extra weight. It was flagged by courthouse security, X-rayed, and deemed safe before a bailiff delivered it to her chambers. Her clerk, a sharp young man named Ben, placed it on her desk. "Looks like fan mail, Judge," he joked. Eleanor slit it open with a letter opener. Inside were 2 items. The first was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "Judge Vance, you are a fair judge." Karen Howard knew that. She is not who her husband says she is. The police in Chicago are too connected to him. You are the only one who can see the truth. Look at the financials. He's not just hiding assets. He's hiding an empire. The second item was a small black USB flash drive. A chill traced its way down Eleanor's spine. This was highly unorthodox, a breach of judicial protocol. Any evidence had to come through official channels. Yet, the note's plea felt urgent, desperate. The police are too connected to him. In a city like Chicago, it was a disturbingly plausible claim. Vincent McGarvey had his tentacles everywhere. "Ben," she said, her voice low. "Close the door." She plugged the USB into her personal laptop, not the court-issued one. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was password protected. But there was another file outside the folder, an audio file named Voicemail Transcript 001. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She clicked on it. The file wasn't a transcript, it was the audio itself. The quality was crystal clear, as if recorded professionally. First, there was Karen's voice, strained but firm. "Karen, I'm not signing the NDA, Vincent. It's a gag order. You're asking me to sign away my right to ever speak about our life, our finances. It's not right." Then came Vincent's voice. It was not the smooth, concerned tone he used for the public. This voice was a shard of ice. "Vincent, you are being naive." This is for your protection as much as mine. Our finances are complex. You wouldn't want to be implicated in something you don't understand, would you, Karen? Implicated in what? What don't I understand, Vince? The shell corporations, the transfers to the Cayman Islands? I wasn't just your wife. I was your bookkeeper for 5 years. I know what I saw. A beat of terrifying silence followed. Then Vincent spoke again, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper that made the hair on Eleanor's arms stand on end. Vincent, you will not take my son from me, Karen, and you will not take a single penny more than what I put on the table. You will sign the papers, and you will disappear quietly from my life. Do you have any idea what I'm capable of? Do you really want to find out? The audio ended. Eleanor sat back, her breath catching in her chest. It was a direct threat. This wasn't a difficult divorce. It was coercion, plain and simple. This recording, if authenticated, was a bombshell. While she wrestled with the ethical dilemma of this anonymous, ex parte communication, her eyes drifted back to the note. Look at the financials. The audio was the appetizer. The real meal was in that encrypted folder. She couldn't use this evidence in the divorce proceeding. But Karen Howard wasn't just a party in a civil suit anymore. She was a missing person, a probable victim of a violent crime. The rules had changed. Eleanor picked up her phone and dialed the direct line for Detective Miles Miller at the 18th District. "Detective," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "This is Judge Vance. I believe I have something you need to see regarding the Karen Howard case. Something that suggests you're not looking for a runaway wife. You're looking for a man who would do anything to keep his secrets buried." As she spoke, she stared at the encrypted folder on her screen. She didn't know who had sent it, but she understood the strategy. The sender hadn't trusted the police, but they had trusted the integrity of the court. They had trusted her. And Eleanor Vance would be damned if she let them down. The package had changed everything, and for Vincent McGarvey, the clock had just started ticking. Detective Miller listened to the audio file in the sterile quiet of Judge Vance's chambers, his expression grim. The voice on the recording was unmistakably Vincent McGarvey's, but stripped of its public charm, it was the voice of a predator. The threat was chillingly clear. This wasn't a domestic dispute. It was the motive for a potential murder. "This changes the game," Miller said, looking at the judge. "But it's anonymously sourced. Admissibility is a nightmare." "I'm aware, Detective," Judge Vance replied, her gaze fixed on the laptop screen. But the note said the real story was in the financials. The audio file was just to get our attention. This is a criminal matter now. That USB drive is probable cause. Get a warrant. Get it opened. It took the Chicago PD's cybercrime unit less than 24 hours to crack the encryption. What they found was staggering. It was a meticulously organized digital archive, a shadow ledger of Vincent McGarvey's entire business empire. It detailed a breathtakingly complex web of shell corporations, illegal offshore accounts, and a systematic money laundering operation that moved tens of millions of dollars through his real estate projects. He was using construction budgets to wash dirty money for some of the city's most dangerous players. The divorce wasn't just about protecting his wealth from Karen. It was about protecting his entire criminal enterprise from exposure. Karen, who had managed his books in the early years of their marriage, was the one person who could decipher the labyrinth. She wasn't just a disgruntled wife. She was a material witness to federal crimes. Her pregnancy and the impending divorce discovery process had put a ticking clock on his freedom. He had to silence her before she could ever testify. The digital files were a ghost telling a story. They contained scanned documents, encrypted emails, and spreadsheets that Karen had clearly been collecting for years. This was her insurance policy. Karen sat at her home office desk late at night, the rest of the penthouse silent. Vincent was in Shanghai for the week. For months, a nagging inconsistency she'd spotted years ago had been bothering her. A project in the South Loop where the concrete budget was triple what it should have been. At the time, Vincent had dismissed it as a clerical error from a subcontractor. She'd been young and trusting and had let it go. Now she couldn't. Driven by a cold intuition, she began digging through old digital files on their home server. It started with that one project. But soon she was pulling on a thread that unraveled a vast, terrifying tapestry. She found dummy invoices, wire transfers to accounts in Panama and the Cayman Islands, and emails using coded language she now understood all too well. Her husband wasn't just a brilliant, ruthless businessman. He was a crook, a high-level one. Her blood ran cold. This was the man she was married to, the man whose child she desperately wanted to carry. The power he wielded wasn't just from his wealth, it was from the dangerous secrets he kept. For weeks, she worked in secret, using sophisticated software to copy and encrypt files, creating a hidden digital archive. She moved the data onto a single, tiny USB drive. It was her only leverage, her only hope of escape. She knew a normal divorce would be impossible. If he even suspected what she knew, her life would be in danger. She had to plan every step with surgical precision. Armed with the explosive financial evidence, Miller got the warrant he needed. He assembled a task force. They would hit Vincent's office and penthouse simultaneously. It was a massive operation, a coordinated strike against a king in his castle. Miller led the team into the pristine, minimalist lobby of McGarvey Properties. The receptionist's eyes went wide as a dozen plain-clothed and uniformed officers swarmed in. "Detective Miller, Chicago PD, we have a warrant to search the premises." They found Vincent in his corner office, on a conference call, the picture of calm authority. When Miller entered, Vincent's face went through a rapid series of emotions. Surprise, then annoyance, and finally, a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, standing up. "You can't just barge in here." "We can and we are," Miller said flatly, handing him the warrant. "I suggest you call your lawyer." As his team began methodically seizing computers and files, Miller conducted his own search of Vincent's personal office. It was obsessively neat. The desk was a vast expanse of polished mahogany, holding only a laptop, a phone, and a framed photo of him and Karen in happier times. Miller's eyes narrowed at the photo. A prop. He ran his hands under the desk, searching for anything unusual. His fingers brushed against a small, magnetic lock. He pressed it, and a hidden compartment on the side of the desk clicked open with a soft hiss. Inside was a burner phone, a fake passport with Vincent's picture but a different name, and 2 first-class plane tickets to the Cayman Islands. They were dated for October 24th, the day after the divorce was supposed to be finalized. This was the smoking gun. Vincent wasn't planning on co-parenting. He wasn't planning on staying in Chicago. He was planning to clean out his accounts and run, leaving Karen with nothing, and his criminal associates holding the bag. But there was still no sign of Karen. The plan hinged on her being out of the picture. The discovery of the abandoned car, the lack of any activity on her bank accounts, it all pointed to the worst possible conclusion. Miller looked at the plane ticket in his hand. One for Vincent McGarvey, one for an alias. No ticket for his wife. The narrative was complete. Vincent was going to force Karen to sign the divorce papers, which included a draconian NDA, likely under threat. Then he would make her disappear, finalize the transfer of his clean assets, and vanish himself before anyone realized she was gone for good. The raid was a success, yielding mountains of evidence. But as Miller stood in the center of Vincent's crumbling empire, a single, horrifying question remained. He had the motive, he had the plan, but he still didn't have the victim. Where in God's name was Karen Howard? The interrogation room was small, grey, and smelled of disinfectant and fear. Vincent McGarvey sat at the metal table, his bespoke suit now rumpled, his composure finally cracking at the edges. His lawyer, Marcus Thorne, looked shaken. For 2 hours, Detective Miller and a stern-faced assistant U.S. attorney had laid out their case. The audio recording of his threat played first, echoing in the cramped room. Vincent paled. They presented the financial documents, a mountain of evidence detailing his money laundering scheme. His face hardened. Finally, Miller placed the burner phone, the fake passport, and the plane tickets to the Caymans on the table. "You were planning on running, weren't you, Vince?" Miller asked, his voice quiet. "The day after the divorce was final. You'd have your freedom, your money, and your pregnant wife would just be gone. A tragic mystery. Tell us where she is, and maybe we can talk to the U.S. attorney about taking the death penalty off the table." "This is insane," Vincent snarled, his voice a low growl. "I didn't harm my wife. I loved her. She ran away. This is all a fabrication, a setup." "Who set you up, Vince?" Miller pressed. "The ghost of your wife? She just happened to have a complete record of your criminal enterprise and got it into the hands of a judge? That's one smart ghost." Vincent's bravado was a dam with 1,000 cracks, and it was about to burst. He was trapped. His empire was in ruins, his freedom gone, but he held one last card. They couldn't prove he'd killed Karen. Without a body, a murder charge would be difficult. He clung to that, his expression turning into a smug mask. Just then, there was a knock on the interrogation room door. A uniformed officer leaned in. "Detective, Ms. Jenkins is here. She says she has someone who wants to make a statement." Miller frowned. "Tell her to wait." "Sir," the officer insisted, "I think you want to see this." A wave of irritation and curiosity washed over Miller. He walked out of the interrogation room into the bustling squad room. Sarah Jenkins stood by the main desk, her expression a mixture of relief and steely resolve. And next to her, looking pale but very much alive, was Karen Howard. She was wearing simple maternity jeans and a sweater, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The sight of her sent a jolt through the entire room. Miller stared, speechless. He had been so certain he was working a murder case. "Karen," he finally managed to say. "Detective," she said, her voice steady. "I believe you've been looking for me." Miller led her to a private office, away from the prying eyes of the squad room. Sarah followed, a protective presence at her side. "Where have you been?" Miller asked, his mind reeling. We thought you were dead." Karen took a deep breath. "I've been in a safe house in Wisconsin since the morning of the divorce hearing. My sister Brenda helped me get there." She then laid out her entire plan, and Miller listened in stunned admiration. She wasn't a victim who had been kidnapped. She was the architect of her own liberation. "I knew Vincent would never let me go peacefully," she began. "Not with what I knew about his business. The divorce hearing wasn't an escape route. It was a deadline. He would have used it to corner me, threaten me, and then make sure I could never talk." She had planned her disappearance for months. The half-packed hospital bag, the untouched tea, all calculated details to create a scene of abduction. Her best friend from college, a tech genius, had helped her stage the abandoned car, wiping it clean of prints and leaving it in a place that screamed foul play. She had intentionally ripped her own earring out to leave behind a sign of a struggle. "I couldn't go to the police," she explained, looking Miller in the eye. "Vincent has boasted for years about the judges and cops on his payroll. I didn't know who I could trust. But I researched Judge Vance. I read her rulings. She was tough, independent, and incorruptible. I knew if I could get the evidence to her, she would do the right thing. She was the one who had sent the package. She had orchestrated the entire takedown from afar, waiting, praying that the seeds she planted would bear fruit. It was the only way, she said, her voice thick with emotion, to protect my baby, to ensure he would never be raised by that man. Miller was awestruck by her courage and ingenuity. She hadn't just run. She'd set a brilliant, intricate trap using Vincent's own arrogance and criminality against him. He's in interrogation room 2, Miller said. He's still denying everything. A hard, determined light entered Karen's eyes. I want to see him. Miller led her to the observation room, the one with the two-way mirror looking into where Vincent was being held. Vincent was pacing now, ranting at his lawyer, a caged animal. Turn on the speaker, Karen said. Miller flipped the switch. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the small grey room. Hello, Vincent. Vincent froze. He slowly turned towards the mirror. He couldn't see her, but he knew that voice. It was the voice from his nightmares, the voice he thought he had silenced forever. It's over, Karen said, her hand on her belly. Your threats don't work anymore. Your money is gone. Your power is gone. You tried to erase me, but you failed. My son will grow up knowing his mother was strong, not that his father was a monster. You will never touch us again. A primal roar of fury and disbelief erupted from Vincent. He finally saw it, not her reflection, but the truth of his defeat. The woman he had underestimated, bullied, and tried to destroy was standing on the other side of the glass, whole and victorious. He lunged at the mirror, his fists hammering against the glass, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. You! He screamed, his voice cracking. You bitch! Officers rushed in and subdued him. As they cuffed him, his eyes, wild and defeated, were still locked on the mirror. On the other side, Karen Howard didn't flinch. She simply watched, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound, long-awaited release. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been shattered. She was free. 6 months later, spring had arrived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, painting the world in shades of green and gold. The air was soft and smelled of lilac and damp earth. In a small, charming bungalow with a wide front porch, Karen Howard rocked gently in a wooden glider, her newborn son, Leo, sleeping peacefully in her arms. The frantic terror of the past year felt like a lifetime away, a story that had happened to someone else. Vincent McGarvey had been denied bail. Facing a mountain of federal charges for fraud, money laundering and racketeering, his legal battles would consume the rest of his life. His empire had crumbled spectacularly, taking down several corrupt city officials with it. The media, which had once painted Karen as an unstable runaway, now hailed her as a brilliant strategist, a symbol of resilience. But Karen ignored the noise. She had won her freedom, and she was using it to build a quiet, meaningful life. Her sister Brenda lived just a few blocks away, and her days were filled with the simple, profound rhythms of new motherhood. Late-night feedings, morning walks in the park, the warmth of a tiny body nestled against her chest. One sunny afternoon, a car pulled up to the curb. An elegant woman with short, silver hair stepped out. It was Eleanor Vance. She had retired from the bench a month after Vincent's arrest. "I hope I'm not intruding," Eleanor said, smiling warmly as Karen met her on the porch. "Not at all, Judge," Karen said, her own smile genuine. "It's an honor to have you." They sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, the baby monitor crackling softly between them. They didn't talk about Vincent or the trial. Instead, they talked about second chances, about the surprising strength women find in the face of impossible odds. What you did, Karen. The courage, the sheer intelligence of it, Eleanor said, her voice filled with admiration. In 30 years on the bench, I've never seen anything like it. You didn't just escape. You brought a corrupt institution to its knees. I did what I had to do for him, Karen said, glancing towards the nursery window. I wanted him to be born into a world without his father's shadow. Before she left, Eleanor handed Karen an envelope. A few of us started a little fund after we retired, for women like you, to help with fresh starts. Karen opened it later. It was a check for a substantial amount. It was then that a new idea began to form, a purpose that extended beyond her own hard-won peace. A year later, the Howard Foundation for Economic Justice opened its doors in a modest Ann Arbor office. Funded by the assets Karen was legally awarded in her divorce settlement and donations from people like Eleanor Vance, its mission was simple: to provide legal aid and financial planning for women trying to escape abusive, controlling partners. She used her intimate knowledge of financial abuse to empower other women, teaching them how to find hidden assets, secure their independence, and fight back against powerful men who used money as a weapon. Karen wasn't just a survivor anymore. She had taken the ugliest parts of her life and transformed them into a source of hope for others. She was building a new kind of empire, one founded not on greed and fear, but on courage and compassion. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across her peaceful backyard, Karen watched a now toddling Leo chase after a firefly. He was a happy, bright boy, full of laughter, completely untouched by the darkness he had been born from. She had not only saved herself, she had saved him. And in that simple, profound truth, she found a satisfaction deeper and more lasting than any fortune or skyline could ever provide. She had found justice. Karen Howard's story is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She refused to be a victim in the narrative written for her by a powerful man. Instead, she took control, using her intelligence and courage to flip the script, proving that true power isn't about wealth or influence, but about the unbreakable will to protect what you love. She transformed her greatest trial into her greatest purpose, building a legacy of hope from the ashes of betrayal. Hers is a journey of reclaiming one's dignity, fighting for justice, and creating a second chance not just for herself, but for countless others. If Karen's story of strength and redemption moved you, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing for more tales of empowerment and survival.